mild technical difficulty where I don't have the clicker, so I have to do this and then go here, so you get to see a lot of additional choreography. Okay, so this talk is called Sitecore Configuration. I think that says 15 tricks in 15 minutes. So my name is Dan Solovay. I've been doing Sitecore for 14 years, so not quite 15. I've been MVP for 12 of them. I work in Valera, Sitecore Platinum Agency in Boston. My contact information is there. If you have questions or feedback, love to hear it. Look for a blog post at valera.com, probably within a month. Oh, fair warning, I've got way too many slides, so I'm going to be going quickly. I have some QR codes. They'll be up for like about 10, 15 seconds. Look for me in the hallway if you missed one that you really want, or wait for the blog post. So a few options there. Okay, what we're going to talk about, and again, I don't have that there, so I got to do this thing, so apologies for that. I'm going to cover some basics. We're going to talk about the significance principle, kind of how configuration patching works. The reason why we have config files is because we need to create objects. So we're going to talk about that and the syntax of parameters and properties. Token substitution, so when you see that $ in parentheses in ShowConfig, exactly what's going on with that. Rule-based configuration, really important feature that came in with Sitecore 9, so we didn't have to disable 25 Lucene files and enable 25 Solar files back when that was a thing. And then an attribute tour, and I have to talk really fast to make it all the way through the attribute tour, but Tomas is going to hold up the end slide, and when that goes up, I can jump to the most important slide so you won't miss anything important. Okay, so basics. I think everyone here knows this. Don't modify stock configuration because you're just going to open yourself up for a world of pain trying to figure out what you did and what Sitecore did. We have app-config include for stuff that's part of your project, and then with, I think, Sitecore 9, we got app-config environment if you want to do little logging tweaks, so I think that's well known. But if you follow the rules, then you get this nice little feature in layers.config where you can have mode equals off and just shut off all of your own customizations and just run on stock Sitecore. So, you enable more tools when you do things the right way. And notice this, we have this foundation feature project, so layers.config got added because the English language is wrong and puts foundation after feature. So that's a bug in the English language that was patched with layers.config. Speaking of Helix, if you do Helix, if you choose to do Helix, then choose to do Helix, have one module per, one config file per feature. So that's from the Helix guide, so feature navigation.config. If you need to turn them on and off, use rule-based configuration, which we'll get to later. If you have 15 config files per module and then they start having different names, it gets very chaotic, and then you have nested folders, and if the names don't follow Helix, then you don't know where they are in Visual Studio, so keep it simple. Okay, significance. So it's always exciting when you get to something great, thank you. He put up a 10 sign. Significance is something that was new for me, so basically this is the way that Sitecore decides to apply patch files. Not all attributes are created equal. There are 60 that are called significant, and basically those are the ones that are used to trigger that a element in the patch file gets applied or doesn't get applied. So this is an example from Sitecore documentation. There are two JavaScript files, so you have JavaScript file 1 and JavaScript file 2, and if you don't have a significant attribute, the second one, if they're in different sources, will just clobber the first one. So they say, well, if you need these to be separate, then add a significant attribute. So they use DESC as one of them, and that keeps them separate. So that's kind of like your leverage of control to prevent them getting overwritten. And there's the first of our quick QR codes if you want to see the list of the 60. I said 10 seconds. I see he put his phone down. I'm going to go by you. When you put your phone down, I move ahead. Okay, so now I have to do this. Oh, yeah, so this is something that's bitten me, can lead to yellow screens. This is actually from a Sitecore container, so I need to double check that this actually will yellow screen, but the general principle applies. Here you have an ID specified. This is like a Docker affordance allow you to change the name of your indexes, but they specify the ID and they specify the type. And what's bitten me in the past is that then you patch the type because you, let's say, switch on rebuild indexes, or SXA used to change the type, and now your patch file is floating in space. It can't get applied on top, and you get a yellow screen because you haven't listed enough parameters. So be minimalistic. And so this is from another patch file, the Japanese patch file, where they just name one attribute to identify it. So just, I used to copy the whole element, and then that just is very fragile. Okay, so now we're object creation, parameters, and properties. So create object, I've never had to use this, but this is what's actually getting why we write config files, why Sitecore writes config files, is because you need to be able to create objects. And the basic signature, there are a lot of overrides, but basically you're passing a path. Here's where you find the config. You can optionally pass parameters. We'll come back to that if I talk really fast. And then you can also have an optional assert whether you want this to blow up if it doesn't find that location. And then that's a static object, but if you do unit testing and you want to be able to mock it, you can just inject base factory, and then you can basically script its behavior. Nice blog post by Brian Peterson on how you might use this to do complex configuration scenarios. He didn't take his phone out, so we're just going to move ahead. Okay, parameters and properties. So this is where, now you've got this path, now it needs to create an object. And this is one of the things that I was confused about until I prepared this talk. The attributes, so you have to pass parameters, and then you want to set properties. It will ignore the wrapping elements. You could put, check caches up after hook type. It'll just get ignored. Doesn't do anything. Has to be a sub-item. So that's point number one. The parameters that get passed to the constructor all have to be strings. If you look at all these types in .peek, you'll see they're all strings because it doesn't have the ability to figure out what type it needs to cast to. But with properties, everything, so it uses the string class iConvertible, so it can do things like take a string to a Boolean. So that's why those are defined as Booleans in this particular class. It can switch from string to GUID. The string class does not know about Sitecore IDs, so it can't do that one. Tokens. He hasn't put up the 5 sign. That's good. We're in the groove here. So we've all seen that. What does that do? Well, first thing, you can handle sc.variable. So sc.variable is how you create basically a symbolic constant in your configuration. So the most common example is where you define the data folder. It defaults as /data. It usually gets patched to app data. And then that gets done in the right order, so that gets applied globally. This is super handy if you have to change 2 locations that you can't control at the same time. I said, oh, we need to. So I had a project where we had to change something in the media library definition and also in some Coveo configuration. And I got some feedback from support, like, well, if we have to change this, how are we going to change that? I was like, that was the answer. Then there's also support for environment variables. That comes up a lot in Docker. So it can say, oh, Docker environment variable says turn on GraphQL. You turn on GraphQL. And this is a very caffeinated talk. 5 minutes, oh dear. Okay, and then this one, this is just pulling from the parent attribute. And you can see it pulls from master, it pulls ID, and it swaps it in there. So you'll see that a lot. If it doesn't find it in the parent, it goes all the way up to the top, to the Sitecore node, which has database defined as SQL Server back from the Oracle days, I guess. Okay, and then you'll see this $1. You have the ability, Sitecore code can actually pass a parameter in. When we saw that parameters in the signature, that's because you can have logic set that, and then you still have the ability to override it if you want to. That's the only example I've found of that. And then we'll get to param 1 possibly later on. Okay, rule-based configuration. We're going to go fast here. I think everyone here, you've come to SUGCON Europe, you probably know rule-based configuration. So basically, this got us out of having to copy out and uncopy. And basically, you define stuff in app settings, web config, you define rules, and then you apply rules. Notice the word yes, we're going to come back to that. Notice it can do Boolean substitution or and not. And this is going to fail because we have custom SMTP on top, but we have email cloud below. So it has to apply all those rules. Suppose you want to check that and see what would happen if you did have that. Well, you don't have to restart Sitecore, which you have to go out to lunch if you do that. You can just use ShowConfig, and you can pass them in a query string. So that's really helpful if you want to, like, just how are these rules going to work? And breathing so everyone else can breathe. You can pass in multiple conditions with a pipe delimiter so that you can actually see that not dedicated dispatch actually does turn that rule off. And at least on my machine, it did. And then finally, you can also set layers. So I just want to see Sitecore configuration. I don't want to see my own configuration. You don't have to do mode equals off. You can just do that from this tool. So this is a really powerful, I mean, we'll use ShowConfig 5 times a day, but now maybe it should be 6 times. Okay, so where are we? Configuration rules, a gotcha. Yeah, so is Jeremy here? Yeah. Yeah, hey, there you go. Yeah, thank you. I had run into this. I was really confused. You wrote a blog post, so all the glory goes to you. Don't use true, because true is always true, even if it's false. And that's a bug. There's a, Jeremy, take a screenshot so you can find your blog post. Okay, and then I don't know if Jeremy Cam is here. He wrote a great blog post on this, got me inspired about it. So, and these will all be up in a blog post of mine, where I talk about other people's blog posts. Okay. Now, are we on the attribute tour already? And the other slide hasn't gone up? 3 minutes? Okay. 3-minute attribute tour. Okay, sometimes you have a property that has to have many things. It's not, you're not setting it to false or true. You actually have to add a bunch of things to it. So if you have hint equals list and your attribute is of type iList, Sitecore does this thing. Okay? If you have a key, then it has to be iDictionary. And then it'll add them to a dictionary. What are we on now? Oh, yeah, you can specify specific method if you're doing a little more logic. I guess this is more Sitecore doing a little bit of logic, but this actually calls add event. And I actually had a screenshot of a little dot peek, and I'm like, you're going to be on the main stage, probably take out the dot peek. This one confused me, raw. This is really important. Like, I had this whole thing about you can't use attributes. Well, these use attributes because when you have raw, it actually takes the whole node and passes it as an XML node. Again, I took out the dot peek, but the dot peek had read the attribute from this node. So whenever you see raw, and that's used a fair amount, it's basically the consuming code has the XML node as an XML node type, and it can read the attributes. Singleton, so you don't get a new linked database every time you call this. Oh, ref, we're on the next to last slide, and I haven't seen another slide. This is excellent. The test runs with the Guinness were actually accurate. Okay, so you can, so you don't have to copy complex configuration all over, or Sitecore doesn't have to. They can define it in one canonical location and reference it in other places. So for example, in the database dictionary, the database definition where you define the classic SQL Server provider, because now you also have the, what is it, the dat file thingy that got added with 10.1. Anyway, you have this configuration that says we have to have a data provider, but there's not a type, which you normally see. You have data provider /main. And then param1, what the heck is that? Well, we know what $ID is. That's going to pull up an ID from a parallel element, which is going to be master or web or core. And then that gets passed down to data provider main. And you see the $1 gets slotted in. So connection string name equals core master web. I had a slide about that. I took it out because I had too many slides. But connection string will actually show the connection string to the code, but will hide it from ShowConfig. So it's a nice security feature. And finally, I'm a unit test geek, so I wrote unit tests on these, and you pull that down from GitHub and play around with it. It doesn't require a license file. You just have to restore your packages. And this is how I've been figuring out, do I actually have this figured out? Is this how it works? So that's there to play around with. And if you haven't yet explored Dublin, I recommend going to the National Library of Ireland, where they've built the National Library of Ireland in Lego. That was very cool. And thank you to our sponsor.